Today I want to talk about why the law was given. And I always make the claim that I went to the Old Testament to figure out why Paul said what he said. So today we're going to do that. We're going to go to Exodus and Jeremiah to find out why the law was given. So first of all, I wanted to start here with Galatians 3:19, where Paul says, well, let's start here first at 18. For if the inheritance depends on the law, then it no longer depends on a promise, but God freely granted it to Abraham through a promise. Why then was the law given? It was added because of the transgressions until the arrival of the seed to whom the promise referred. It was administered through angels by a mediator. So I just want to focus on this part right here. Why was the law given? It was added because of transgressions. So I first kind of figured this out because I was reading in Jeremiah 7 first, this passage here that says, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Put your burnt offerings unto your sacrifices, and eat flesh. For I spake not unto your fathers, nor commanded them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning burnt offerings or sacrifices. But this thing I commanded them, saying, Obey my voice, and I will be your God, and ye shall be my people. And walk ye in all the ways that I have commanded you, that it may be well unto you. But they hearkened not, nor inclined their ear, but walked in the counsels and the imaginations of their evil heart, and went backward, not forward. So here, God was telling Jeremiah that he didn't even speak to the fathers about sacrifices or burnt offerings when he first brought them out of Egypt. And then I was continuing to read Jeremiah, and I came across this verse. And in Jeremiah 11, God tells Jeremiah, it says, And the Lord said to me, Proclaim all these words in the city of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem. Hear the words of this covenant and do them. For I solemnly warned your fathers when I brought them up out of the land of Egypt, warning them persistently even to this day, saying, Obey my voice. Yet they did not obey, nor incline their ear, but everyone walked in the stubbornness of his evil heart. Therefore I brought upon them all the words of this covenant, which I commanded them to do, but they did not. So in both passages he says that when he first brought them out of the land of Egypt, he just told them to obey his voice. But they didn't obey him, and they walked in the stubbornness of their evil heart. That's also what Jeremiah 7 said, that they followed their evil hearts. So in both passages, he says that they followed their evil hearts. They didn't listen to him when he first brought them out of Egypt, when he told them to obey his voice. Here in this passage, he says for them to hear the words of the covenant and do them. And they had no choice to do them by this point because they'd already been given them, so they had to do them. But he says that when he first brought them out of the land of Egypt, he warned them persistently and told them, obey my voice. But since they didn't obey or incline their ear and everyone followed his evil heart, therefore, meaning because of that, I brought upon them all the words, and this word is debar, same as this one, hear the debar of this covenant and do them. Therefore I brought upon them all the debar of this covenant, which I commanded them to do, but they did not. So between these two passages I was confused because I've always thought that when God first brought Israel out of Egypt that he gave them commandments and laws about the sacrifices and all these different laws. So I went back and did a re-examination starting in Exodus 15 when they first left Egypt. So this is when they arrived in the wilderness. And first they sing this song to honor God for bringing them out. And then we get down to this point where says that they came to Marah. They could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? And he cried unto the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, which, when he had cast it into the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them. Should be, there he tested them, if you were reading another version. And said, If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord, there is that, obey my voice, diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. So right here, when he brings them out, he gives them their first statute and ordinance. Well, he had given them a statute and ordinance in Exodus 12 when he told them to continue to honor the Passover. But he's saying here that if they will give ear to his commandments and his statutes, then he won't put any of the diseases on them. So when he says commandments and statutes, like I said, one of the ones that he gave them was back in Exodus 12. But we also know that there were, commandments and things before this, like Noah already knew that God told Noah that you couldn't kill anyone. So these were like, minimal things that God had told people through time. So we know Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all of them, they basically walked this way. They walked with the Lord, listening to what he had to say and doing what he said. So this is what he offers Israel when he first brings them into the wilderness. And then I looked at Exodus 16. So after he tells them that, they go to Elim and they arrive there, and the children of Israel murmur against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. Now this time, they say that they wish they had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt. And they said that they had meat in their pots and bread to the fill, and he shouldn't have brought them into the wilderness. And they said, you're going to kill this whole assembly with hunger. And so because they complain and they're not grateful, and they say, oh, we had it better back in the land of Egypt. Then the Lord said unto Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them again here, that I may test them, whether they walk in my law or no. So now he's saying, listen, I'm going to give them a law. Let's see if they'll obey it. They didn't obey it. If you read Exodus 16, people went out and gathered on the seventh day, and after he told them not to, and he told them not to leave any left over overnight, and they did. So basically this whole test shows that they're not going to be keeping his command here. So then we go on to chapter 17, and in this chapter we see that again they complain that they don't have water, and so because of this, he does go ahead and give them water. But then if you just notice as you go through, it just seems like the people don't trust the Lord. And again, I wanted to point out, going back to Jeremiah 7, where he says that he didn't talk to them about burnt offerings or sacrifices. I noticed too that starting in 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, there's no talk of any kind of sacrifices in here either. And this is a 2-month period that they're actually in the wilderness at this time. So during this 2 months, God has just given them a very minimum amount of laws, and both times he says that he did it to test them, to see if they would do what he said. So could they be like Noah and Abraham and others, Adam? Could they just listen to his voice and do what he said, or was he going to have to do something else with them? He goes through all this, and then we get to this point, and they complain because they don't have water, like I said. And so this, God gives them water, and then there's this fight with Amalek. And then I noticed that at the end of this, the war with the Amalek people, it says that Moses built an altar and called the name of it, whatever this is, for he said, because the Lord hath sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. I noticed that he builds an altar, but he doesn't sacrifice anything on it. We don't read anything about a sacrifice, which again goes back to Jeremiah 7, where he says when he brought him out to the land of Egypt and into the wilderness, he didn't talk to them about sacrifices. So far, no one has offered a sacrifice, not even to eat or anything. No one has offered an animal sacrifice. So then we go to chapter 18, and this is where Jethro comes to see Moses, and Moses tells him about all the great things that the Lord has done. Actually, the very first person to offer a sacrifice is Jethro, which is Moses' father-in-law, which we find out later in scripture that he was a pagan priest. But he is the first one to offer a sacrifice, and it says here, he says that now he knows that the Lord is greater than all the gods, for in the thing wherein they dealt proudly, he was above them. And so it says, he took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God, and Aaron came and the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. So he offers some kind of burnt offering and sacrifice. The elders only eat bread with him. And then after he does this, he sees that all the people gather around Moses, and Moses is the one teaching them the ordinance and the laws and what they should do and how they should walk. And so Jethro tells Moses that he should put some people over groups of, groups of 10 and whatnot over the people. And so they can make the judgments over the people and teach them, because he says you're going to wear yourself out. Moses goes ahead and does that. But interestingly, if you go back to Exodus 15, who did the Lord say that they needed to listen to? He said, if you will obey my voice. At this point, I noticed that Israel is really, really reliant on Moses. They treat Moses almost like a god, and they just want to learn everything from him. Here again, they're just not relying on the Lord. So after all this goes down, if you get to chapter 19, now this is 2 months later. If you go back and look you can read at the beginning of each chapter, it'll kind of tell you what date they were at, but just for time purposes, I'm trying to rush through this. Now we're in the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt. The same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. Okay, so on this day is when the Lord tells Moses that he wants Moses to bring the people to the mountain, because he is going to give them a covenant. Really, the point I'm trying to make here is that when Paul says that the law was added because of the transgression, if you go back and just read through Exodus 15, 16, 17, 18, you'll see that it was because of the transgression. Twice God tests them to see if they're going to listen to him, and in both accounts they fail. And then, like I said, they complain. First they complain about water, then they complain about food, that they don't have meat in their pots, they don't have bread to eat, and that they had it better back in Egypt, so not even grateful. And then in the 3rd instance, they complain about water again. Also, they, treat Moses like a god. They don't rely on God in any of the situation. They just seem to be totally reliant on Moses and not really praying to the Lord, asking him to give them, to provide for them. So, like I said, we come to 19. God tells Moses to bring them to the mountain, because he is going to give them a covenant. And notice he says, and he said unto the people, be ready against the 3rd day, come not at your wives. And he says, and it came to pass on the 3rd day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings, thick cloud upon the mountain, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loudly, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the nether part of the mountain. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Okay, so the Lord comes here and he speaks to them, and this is when they first get the covenant. So why was the law given? It was given because of the transgression. What were the transgressions? Well, some of the transgressions were that they complained and murmured about God not providing for them. They said they had it better back in Egypt, so they did not appreciate what the Lord had done for them. And on top of that, when he gave them the testing, the commandment of the Sabbath in Exodus 16, they didn't keep that. They broke it in all kinds of different ways. Not only did they let food stay overnight, but they also went out on the Sabbath day and collected some when he told them not to. And then he told them to all stay in their homes after that. So it is obvious that they were not going to listen to him. The point I'm trying to make here is that in Jeremiah 11, when God says that he didn't speak to them about anything except obeying his voice, and same thing he said in Jeremiah 7, that he told them just to obey his voice. The point is, just like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, which was a perfect situation, they walked with the Lord and they heard his voice and they did what he said until they listened to the serpent, and then sin was brought onto the earth. So when God brings Israel into the wilderness, it almost seems like he's trying to start over. He's trying to do a whole new situation. It's kind of similar to Adam and Eve, where they just obey his voice. But it was the same thing with Noah, Abraham, and all of them. They just obeyed his voice. But it was obvious that these people were going to need a set of laws or a code to live by, like all the other nations around them. All the other nations around them already had a law code. And in another video in the future, might even be the next video I make, I will show how a lot of the laws that God gave them are very similar to the different law codes that were going on in the world, even before the time that they were in the wilderness, and even at the same time going on in the land, which were laws that these people would be familiar with, so that would make the law code a lot easier for them to follow. But I just wanted to point out why then the law, because Paul says was added because of the transgressions until the arrival of the seed to whom the promise referred. The promise referring to the promise made to Abraham here. So the law was given until that promise that was made to the seed. Until that seed arrived, the law would keep them in order, because obviously they were not going to be able to walk with the Lord just listening to his voice like their forefathers had. And it was administered through angels by a mediator, and I'll talk about that in the future as well. But anyway, I just wanted to share this passage, and so now you know why I always say that I go back to the Old Testament to see why Paul says what he says, and I think this clearly shows what happened in Exodus that caused them to need the law, and Jeremiah 11 and Jeremiah 7 also confirm that. So anyway, you all have a great day, and I will be back next week with another video. Shalom.